All right, let's talk comics. Hey, hey, baby, I like it like that. I like it like that. All right, hey, what is up, everybody? Thank you once again for joining me for a exciting, enthralling episode of The Creator's Table. My guest this week, you know him, you love him, Kneel Before Doomface, Darkwing Duck, etc., etc. His name is Aaron. Keep your eye on the Sparrow. Aaron Sparrow is my guest this evening. And he will be with us shortly. So been a bit of a crazy week this week. Definitely a crazy day. I am in beauteous Fort Smith, Arkansas, visiting family. And I didn't frankly know if I was going to make it or not. But here I am, live and in color. So thank you for joining me. Got some news, kids. Got some interesting news. So there is a Sword and Sorcery magazine that posted an open submission period for stories. So, it's prose. Now, my whole career, I guess, if you want to call it that, of writing has been screenplays. That's where I first started writing. I first started writing screenplays because I was going to be the next Kevin Smith. I wanted to make film. Film was my first love, and that's what I was going to do. Hey, Cole King. Old King Cole was a merry old soul. How you doing, brother? Good to see you in the chat. Thank you for joining. And just like that, he walked out of our lives forever. So that's what I first started writing. I first started writing screenplays, and it was comedies. Comedy was my first love. When it came to writing, I love making people laugh. And I always felt like comedy was a noble calling. You know, you could take somebody who's having like their worst day, and if you can make them laugh, you know, you can completely change their whole perspective on their day, but just by getting them to laugh. So that was what the bulk of my writing has been. And then, of course, Some Big Lumberjack. I went from screenplays to comic book scripts. So I always kind of kept them, you know, similar. And then now with the Nostradamus effect. So long story short, I am submitting a short story, prose. Ooh la la. I'm doing some prose for this Sword and Sorcery magazine. And I've never written Sword and Sorcery stories before. However, I do like the Beastmaster and Conan the Barbarian. I have read all of Robert E. Howard's Conan. So without any further ado, enough about me. Please, that's not why we're here. Please welcome to the stage a young, spry, and devilishly handsome Aaron Sparrow. Hello, Mr. Sparrow. How are you?
I'm sorry,
sir?
you said young, spry, handsome. I was expecting somebody else.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well as well. Well, so thanks for joining me. Glad we could get you on. I've been looking forward to chatting with you about creating.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I'm sorry that I had missed. I'm just don't mind me looking down. I'm just tweeting out the link to people so
oh,
they
no
can come
worries,
in and
man.
watch. Um, I'm sorry I missed the previous one we set up. We had a little bit of a time difference. You said 8 o'clock, and I'm like, cool. And then I'm thinking Pacific Standard Time, and you were talking Central, so I completely buggered that.
Hey, that's it was all good. I ended up talking about myself, which is my own favorite subject. So it's easy and it makes for a funny story. Uh, now, I first, I followed you for a bit now on X, and the first thing I've seen of yours was this kneel before doom face,
hmm
and holy crap, man! You were gracious enough to give me a review version. So good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
I mean,
I'm actually looking over at a stack of about 150 of them that have to go to the post office tonight.
oh,
Um,
that's awesome.
I've been sitting and fulfilling all day, so my fingers hurt.
Man, what a great story that was. I know this isn't how I usually start the show, but I just wanted to talk about it because I'm so excited about this. I've got to get my hands on a copy somehow because I know the campaign's over. But golly, I absolutely loved this story. First off, the art is fantastic. And secondly, just the way you've done it and just the humor with it is just it's right up my alley. It's a similar humor. The way I see it is as the Tick. It's not like the Tick.
Mhm.
It's not. I don't mean to say it's like that at all, but it's a similar type of dry humor, which I love. Sahara Desert dry humor is right in my wheelhouse. Uh, so anything like that, anything kind of oddball, and holy moly, I absolutely loved this.
Oh, thank you
So
so much. Yeah, I when I tell people like when they're kind of like, well, what's it like? I tell people if you enjoy the Tick or the Venture Brothers or Sam and Max or even like my work on Darkwing Duck, you'll find something in this to enjoy because it is very much inspired by all of those things.
okay, good. I'm glad that's good. I'm glad this because some people you can be like, oh, this reminds me of that, and they're like, oh, that's not what
No,
I was
look,
going for.
listen, if it reminds you, like you could tell me it reminds you of anything, and if it resonated with you, then I'm that's a compliment. It may not be what I intended, but it may it's still if you saw that in it, it probably did creep in there because it's ultimately we kind of become the product of all the things that we've consumed as creators,
Very
and all the
true.
things that inspire us, and we do our own versions of that. So I just take it all as a compliment.
Now, one thing that I did find out, and I think I saw on your post as well, was your involvement with Darkwing Duck.
Mhm.
Now, the cartoon, the original cartoon, man, that was one of my favorites back in the day. I mean, I come home from school and I loved Darkwing Duck. Like I was a heavy guitar player at the time. Meaning I played guitar a lot. Not that I was a fat guitar player. Well, I was a fat guitar player, but I wanted like my dream guitar at the time was I wanted to get a Fender with Darkwing Duck painted on it. I just thought it was such a great character. But and then I find out you did some like graphic novels or something with it. What you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, it was a really weird. It's a really weird kind of journey. The whole Darkwing Duck thing. I was a big fan of the show. I was I was a teenager when it first started coming out, and would watch it with my brother. We liked all the Disney afternoon stuff. We were already big DuckTales fans. So,
Yeah.
Going from DuckTales to a superhero duck, which is something, else I was already interested in because I was reading superhero comics, it was a perfect fit for me. So the show ended, and I always kind of had this idea in my head, like, man, that was such a great show, such a great property. It'd be great to bring it back. And I had no idea how to like get into animation or how to like make any of those connections, but
Sure.
I did get into comic books. And so like in my head, it was like this idea of like, man, it would be cool to bring that back in comics. Here's what we would do. We would call it the Duck Knight Returns. It would be set like a year after the show, so we could kind of like break things apart and then put them back together in an interesting way, you know, and kind of like just create a little bit of mystery. And then lo and behold, I was working for a toy company, and it was the writing was on the wall that it wasn't going to be around much longer because the owner and his wife, who owned it together, he was cheating on her with one of the employees.
Oh.
So it was like, okay, the writing's on the wall. And Boom had
Right.
tried to Boom Studios had tried to hire me a couple of times because I'd worked at Tokyo Pop, and Mark Panizia, who I'd worked for at Tokyo Pop, had recommended me a couple of times. And they'd tried to hire me, but the money was never really there. So with everything kind of falling apart, I contacted them and I said, "Hey, I think you know, I am looking to make the jump." And they said, "Oh, well, we can pay a little bit better now." And it wasn't much better, but it was a little bit better than they had offered initially. And I went in for an interview on a Monday, and they told me, "Well, listen, we have the Disney license, and we're going to be doing these books." And I said, "Well, what do you have the license for?" And they said, "Well, for all the Disney standards for Pixar and Muppets." And so we're kind of looking at doing like these three different lines, you know, a Muppets line, a Pixar line, and a Disney standards line. And I said, "Does the Disney standards include Darkwing Duck?" And, you know, CEO of Boom looked me right in the face and said, "What is that?" And so, you know, it's just one of those situations where it's like, you've got a thing, but you don't really know what you have, you know?
Right.
And so I pitched the idea of Darkwing, and I said, you know, you've got people like me who are like, you know, my age, who are now like having kids, and they want to share that with, you know, their own. It's like the perfect, you know, it's ducks, it's superheroes, right in the comic market. You know, you're doing the Disney stuff. It's perfect. And they didn't want to do it. They were convinced that they were going to reprint all of this old Mickey Mouse material and some newer material from Italy, which was interesting. But they were going to reprint it and then sell it to libraries in like these prestige collections and just make an insane amount of money. Well, at the time, I had I had driven in that day, and I was listening to NPR, I think, and there was a whole story on there about how libraries were collapsing. You know, like they weren't able to, like their budgets were collapsing and withdrawing. And I was like, this is a bad plan. So I was always trying to steer them in a successful direction, despite what they wanted to do. Like, you know, I was the only person. I was the only person in the company. Like, I was answering to a managing editor who had worked at Meltdown Comics, and his experience was he ordered books for the store. And now he was like the managing editor that, you know, who didn't know anything about the Pixar properties, didn't know anything about Disney, but I'm supposed to take direction from him, right? And so I was continually pointing out to them, because they'd have these plans. They'd say, we're going to do this. And I would say, okay, well, when I worked at Tokyo Pop, or, you know, when I did this, they tried that, and here are the pitfalls they ran into. So, if, you know, I'm not saying it won't work. I'm just saying, like, watch out for these pitfalls.
Right.
And that kind of, instead of it being interpreted sometimes, I think, with as me trying to help, it was interpreted as like me being a naysayer and like poo-pooing all their plans.
Geez.
So they didn't want to give me what I wanted to do, you know, and it didn't really happen until everything they were doing kind of fell apart, you know, because the point I had made about Mickey Mouse is, I said, you know, Mickey Mouse is an icon, but for the last several decades, he hasn't been allowed to be a character. He's a sweatshirt. He's on a hat. You know, he's a corporate logo, if anything else. I said, it's not like Bugs Bunny, where if I told you, name 5 things that are interesting that Bugs Bunny did, you could rattle them off like, you know, no problem. You know, Mickey had a big image problem in that he was just seen as dull and bland, and, you know, had a voice like a girl. That was like basically the perception of him. So I knew that we wanted to do something else. And so we tried to put Chippendale Rescue Rangers in like the Walt Disney and Stories, because we had like a pre-printed adventure that we could have put in there that was kind of like going to be our test run. And we even solicited it. And then again, the managing editor and the marketing director, neither of the guys who really had their finger on anything, they just like to be the boss of stuff, got into the CEO's ear, and we're like, this isn't going to work. And so like we had to go in and we had to like re-solicit, and it was just a big mess. Anyway, I think to shut me up, they finally gave me 4 issues of Darkwing Duck, and we solicited the first issue. First of all, when we announced it at Seattle, the crowd went nuts. It was like really the only thing. It was really the only thing at the Boom panel that got any attention. And so
Wow.
I think that whereas I had this idea that I was going to do the best things that I could do for the fans and then for the company, and within the company that got looked at as I was like, I don't know, that I was full of myself, or that, because I kept having these reactions to things that I was pitching that they had tried to shut down. And then when they gave me a little bit of leeway, it would, I would think that as that happened, you would actually be like, okay, well, what other ideas do you have?
Right.
But it's almost like the powers that be, because, they got resentful. And so there were people that, the managing editor, and I think maybe even later the marketing director. Actually, I don't think the marketing director really turned on me until they actually fired me. But the managing editor definitely wanted me out, and eventually he got his way. Right after I saved the business at Pixar, they had made a colossal blunder on a call with Pixar, and Pixar was going to take the license away. And then Jesse Post, who was in Disney Publishing, got me a meeting with Pixar, like a creative meeting, and I went up there and like saved the business, for them. And then they fired me a week later. And then Pixar pulled the license shortly thereafter because they were told, oh, Aaron's no longer with the company. We let him go. And I was told by someone at Pixar that their response was, well, obviously, everyone here at Pixar is very disappointed in your decision, and then pulled the license. And then they lost the Disney shortly thereafter.
Wow.
But yeah, no, it was a really interesting time. It really taught me a lot about, you think that you do a good job and you make a company money. And anytime a company has gotten out of my way, and just let me be creative and hire people and put programs together, they've made money. But I really saw the comic industry for what it was finally, by coming in and no longer just being a fan, but being on the interior. I was like, oh, good work escapes more than it is designed and put out because of the egos involved.
Wow. And people who are running the boat, running the show, and have no knowledge of what's going on out in the world. I mean, who doesn't know Darkwing Duck? Like that's
well, I mean, nobody at the company did. Nobody in none of the higher ups, really did. The only person that knew it was Adam Fortier, who had put together the licensing deal, because he was a huge Disney fan. So he knew what we were doing. And then Jesse Post, obviously at Disney. A lot of people think, oh, well, was it hard to get Disney to do this? No, Disney Publishing was on board. They were like, yeah, do it. That sounds great. It was, the powers within Boom that I had to convince. And it really soured me on kind of like the corporate comics. Yeah, I was like, this is not the place for me. I mean, look, on the first day that I started, both the managing editor and the marketing director took me aside at different points and told me, and now Mark Waid was editor-in-chief at this point, but he wasn't in the office because they had kind of like shuffled him off to do writing. They didn't want him there. They wanted his name on the masthead because it gave them some prestige, but they didn't want him actually doing the job. So they were like, go home and write, Mark. Because Mark would get involved in things as the editor-in-chief. He'd be like, this person says they haven't been paid. Can we pay them? Little things like that. But I was taken aside by both the managing editor and the marketing director on the first day and told, don't ever go to Mark Waid. Don't go to Ross. I'm the guy that runs the office. I got told that by two different people. You come to me. And I was like, so immediately I knew. I was like, oh, I'm sailing between the Scylla and the Charybdis, to be real time finally here with the Odyssey.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like, and I thought I could weather it, but man, it was just eventually it became too much. I think I was there a little over a year before that ended.
Man, I don't know that I could have handled that. That's kudos to you for sticking it out for a year.
Well, the funny thing was, like, right, so Darkwing gets announced at Seattle Comic Con. Everybody's thrilled. It goes nuts. It becomes the best-selling thing that we've done. It even beat out like The Incredibles as far as a property with the issue orders. And so I get told, hey, map out like the next year or so of storylines, like give us an outline. So I took my team to lunch and I said, this is what I want to do. And we all like kind of like mapped it out, and everybody kind of like threw in, like some ideas or some jokes here and there, but we had like a really solid outline. And then as soon as they had that, we came back from Pixar and they fired me, and then they took all that and they gave it to, and it just, the book became a shadow of its former self. Now I ended up still ghostwriting a lot of it because first the editor that replaced me came and asked me to do it, and then so I started on I did 2 issues, I think, And then Darkwing's creator, Tad Stones, I went to dinner with him, and he was like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "They treated you like shit. Don't give them anything." And I was like, "Yeah, but Tad, I worked so hard to get this done, and it's your baby, and blah blah blah." And he was like, "I don't care. Like, they mistreated you. Don't do any work for them." So I called the editor and I told him that I wasn't going to do it anymore. Well, what happened then is he went to James Silvani and asked if James could overwrite it, because the writer whose name they were putting on it was so terrible and was delivering such bad scripts. Which wasn't a problem when I was the editor, because they wouldn't let me write it. So I just gave my outlines and my scripts to Brill, who asked to write it, because I thought, I'll do him a favor. He'll get his name on the book and get some chops. But I knew that whatever wasn't good, I could fix and post. Well, they no longer had me there to fix and post, and then he started trying to alter my outlines with some of his bad ideas. So they asked James Silvani to write it, and James came to me because we were good friends, and he said, look, they're asking me to step in and replace you. And I knew that it was a really important book for him, because he had told me that his art career had basically run aground, and he was thinking that he was going to have to go get a job in a gas station or something. He lives on Maui. Ooh. He was going to have to go go work at Costco or something, because obviously everything wasn't working out. And right before he made that decision, I had swooped in and I gave him a Muppets book, and then he had delivered so well on Muppets. I was like, "Do you want to do this Darkwing book?" And so he was getting a lot of attention, a lot of acclaim, a lot of Disney work. And so I didn't want to let him down. And so I told him, I said, "Okay, I'll ghostwrite this with you, or for you. But as long as you agree that when this is all over and this license is done at Boom, we can talk about what I did." And he was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And so that's kind of how we did it. Now, a lot of it still got altered by Brill in post. There were things that happened in there, like the fridging of Morgana, that I never would have done. Later get to restore my scripts, my dialogue, to the Definitively Dangerous edition when it went to Joe Books. And that was one of the things that Disney said, is they said, "We'd like to reprint this Boom series that was really popular." And Disney Publishing told them, "Well, you can do it, but you need to go back to Sparrow and Silvani and get these, get their original intent for the material." And so we worked on that, and then after that, we got a little short run at Joe Books before they kind of made some financial mistakes and ended up going under.
What kind of feeling was that when you found out that when Pixar heard that you were no longer with them, that Pixar was like, "Well, we aren't either. Goodbye." That had to be incredible.
That was incredible, because we had gone up there. It was originally supposed to be just me and Jesse Post from Disney Publishing going up to Pixar. Yeah. But because going to Pixar was kind of seen as prestigious, and because they had blundered so badly and they wanted to kind of try to save the business, the managing editor and Ross Ritchie, the owner, ended up going up there with me. And so, we had the glad hand kind of meeting at the beginning, but then once we got down to creative brass tacks, it was Ben Butcher who was in charge of their licensing and things, but he was a creative, and they had some other creative people in the room, and me, and we just started riffing on what we would do for these books for the next year. And they really, really liked it. I contributed some ideas. They threw some stuff out. We kind of bounced off each other. It was a really good creative energy, like you would expect from Pixar in its heyday. And so we came out of there with a year's worth of stories. And then, a week later, I was fired. Because, what does Boom need before? They had everything locked in,
Yep.
Well, 2 weeks after that, or maybe it was 2 weeks to a month, San Diego Comic-Con rolled around. And I was always working at San Diego Comic-Con. And I ran into Ben Butcher. And he was like, "What the hell happened, man? We were told that, you got fired." And I said, "Well, this is what happened." And I had gone in and I'd gotten tested for some stomach pain, and they were testing me for to see if I had stomach cancer, or maybe I was working on an ulcer. Best case scenario ulcer, worst case stomach cancer. I said, and I went back into the office. I said, "I don't know if this had anything to do with it," but I went back in and I said, "This might be, a concern." And I got all the, "Oh, don't worry, we're going to help you get through this," and blah, blah, blah. And a week later, I was fired. Wow. So I told Ben that, and Ben said, "Well," he goes, "you'll be happy to know that when they sent that over to us, we said to them, we're obviously very disappointed in this decision." And he goes, "And we're pulling the license. They're not going to be able to do Pixar books anymore." Man. And then shortly thereafter, they lost the Disney license entirely. mostly because they were going to print without approval from Disney. They were just putting things out.
What the hell?
Yeah, I remember while I was still there, I got a call because we were doing the Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck by Don Rosa, and they had made the brilliant decision to break it into 2 parts so they could sell it twice. Which didn't please Don Rosa, obviously, because he has a very specific way about the way he'd like his material released. And I had the proof sitting in my inbox that I had not signed off on yet, and I get a call from Jesse Post, who was at Disney Publishing at the time, who was our liaison, and he said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Why am I standing here in a comic book store looking at a Boom Studios Volume 1 edition of the Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck?" And I said, "I have no idea." I said, "I haven't approved that file. It's still sitting." And sure enough, there were some things that were wrong with it. They had just sent it to print. They just sent it to print to get it out, and they didn't even tell me, the editor. And it was just in bookstores. So yeah, just a lot of malfeasance, at the time at the company, which they later regretted the fact that I had never signed a non-disclosure agreement when I worked there, because look, I always try to be very professional with the companies that I work for. There's been a couple where I've had to go to war with them, and it's very simply because I have a very simple rule: don't lie about my time there. Don't try to damage my reputation, and don't try to screw me out of money. And so the only 2 companies that I've really ever gone to war with are Boom Studios and Merck Publishing. One because they tried to destroy my reputation, the other because they screwed me out of money. So it's just one of those things where it's like, the industry thrives on the fact that thrives on the idea that they can screw you over as a creator or an editor or a writer or any kind of creative. They can screw you over, and it'll be fine because you're so afraid that some other company might not hire you that you'll be quiet.
Right.
But that's not my MO. I don't need to work for any of these companies. Obviously I'm perfectly capable of finding work on my own and doing quality comics without, especially as the industry has changed. The gatekeepers don't matter anymore. Oh no, I'll never get to write a low-selling book at Marvel. Okay.
Touche, Monsieur Pussycat. I'd like to kind of rewind a little bit. One thing I really am fascinated with is the creative mind and what starts that. You see similarities, you also see differences. So, like, for instance, a couple of weeks ago, I had Dan Lawless on, and he was talking about how his mother exposed him and his siblings to art from a very early age, and encouraged them to be, to do art and to draw and I thought that was really interesting because initially I was a musician, like through high school and stuff, and I know I hear a ton of stories from musicians who say, "Oh, my dad was really big into blues, and that's all we heard growing up," or what have you, right? The parent exposes the child to what becomes something that's very important to them and becomes a source of creativity. I'm an exception to that rule. My mom hated music. I grew up with my mom and dad split when I was 4. My mom hated music. Every car she owned only had an AM band radio, and she would listen to like medical talk shows, and not like Dr. Pimple Popper type stuff, like brain surgery and all this really bizarre stuff. And of course, I'm a little kid, like trying to listen to this stuff. But anyways, so there's similarities and there's differences, and I just am really fascinated with, what if you look back at yourself and, is there one event or one point that you can say this is what really kind of sparked my interest in telling stories or creating worlds? Is there, or is it just a progression?
No, I mean, actually, I know kind of where it came from. Is it's like I was an only child up until like the time I was 10, Didn't have a very good childhood. My mom, a broken home and all that sort of thing. My mom was shacked up with a drug dealer, and so I spent a lot of time like in my own head, just trying to escape from reality. And I had something that I think, I had a wonderful grandmother. I had a lot of who I think felt bad for the situation that we, we were in, and tried to do our best to kind of like mitigate it. But one of the things that I did always have was I had like a lot of comic books that she would give me, or and a lot of action figures that she would buy. So
Sure.
I was always out in the backyard, like kind of creating my own adventures and things like that with Star Wars, and then later G.I. Joe and Masters of the Universe, and just the great toy lines that like still to this day they these properties still live on. And so like that kind of like spurred my interest in storytelling. And then once I got into junior high, I used to like draw my own comic books, and they were just like very like formative and simplistic and silly, like it's like Garfield is the Caped Avenger, because I read the Garfield strips, and but I would do these like kind of like serious kind of like comic book adventures with Garfield, and then a bunch of characters that I came up with, and characters that I'd like stolen from other from other things that I was interested in. But I met these two guys, Mike Howard and Mike Watson, and I might call Mike Watson Rocky because that was his nickname. So if I slip in and I say that, don't get confused. But Mike was a big DC guy, and Rocky was a big art guy, who also like the X-Men and things like that. So like we were all kind of like reading the same comics. And we started hanging out, and we would get together and we would just like draw our own comics. We would draw our own handbook to our universes, because the Marvel handbooks were coming out that time. Like Rocky's parents had like this typeset machine where you could actually like go in and, so we'd draw the panels on a piece of paper and then go in and type, do all the typesetting, so that we could have our whole like entry and then put them in a binder of our own stuff. It was just like a really interesting creative time. So that's where I knew that I wanted to, I wanted to create stories. My grandmother, bless her, I've told this story a bunch of times. So I see Ben Soto's in the chat. Ben, I apologize if you've heard this a million times. But my grandmother thought like there was this Marvel artist that was he'd done some work for Marvel. I don't know if he was like a steady artist there, but he was doing a signing, not too far from her house. And she thought, oh, I'll take Aaron. This will be great. And so I went and I like showed him like my drawings and things like that. And I don't know. I don't remember who it was. I wish I did, but he could not have been more bitter. I don't think he was. I don't think he was smoking, but in my mind he was. Like he was just like, because he basically he gave me the comics will break your heart kid speech. He was like, listen, be like a dentist or something. There's no money in this, and so it really discouraged me from drawing. So I stopped drawing, and I kind of didn't think about story writing for a couple of years until I met some people online on like the old Prodigy boards that liked comics, and then we would do like these story groups where we would get together and each person would write the next part of this. We'd just settle on a world and some characters, and then each person would come in and write the next chapter.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it would get kind of funny because like you'd try to put the next writer in like a predicament that then they had to figure out how to get the characters out of.
Nice.
So that was like a really good way to like kind of like iron sharpening iron. Like you were just so that was like probably where my love came from. And then when I found out that I had set a goal for myself where I was like, if I can't figure out a way to break into this industry by the time I'm 30, because I was just working customer service jobs, call center jobs, like whatever, whatever paid the bills. Sometimes really good paying, but I just thought, man, if I don't break in by the time I'm 30, I'm gonna get out, because you don't want to be the guy in the garage band that's like 50 that like is still trying to break in, but I think it was like 3 months before my 30th birthday, I got the job at Tokyo Pop. They've been doing comics ever since.
That's awesome. That's awesome, man. Yeah. I would really just personally, I would have to say that Star Wars definitely played a big part. I mean, I saw it in '78 after they re-released it a year, just commemorating the year after it was originally released. And that's when my mom took me to see it. And I mean, it just exploded my imagination. And same thing. Like I remember one Christmas I had gotten all the Millennium Falcon, the Death Star playset, all this stuff. And I had I had the little record, the little vinyl of Star Wars with the little read along book.
Oh
And
yeah,
I would,
yeah,
and
classic.
I would I would set the action figures up and then play the record, and make them move with the scenes and stuff in the record. And that's kind of what first started me with kind of telling stories and making stories up. And then I was a daydreamer. Anytime I was in school and whatever was being spoken, if it didn't hold my interest at all, I was looking out the window and imagining whole other worlds. It's funny. There's a Looney Tunes cartoon about a kid who does that. He's in school and he starts the teacher starts talking and they kind of fade out and he gets this big grin on his face, and then I think he imagines himself as MacArthur. And,
Well, that's what Calvin and Hobbes was so beloved, right? Is because
Pony Express, yeah.
Any kid that like had that sort of imagination, Calvin was me. Like I was like, yeah, that was me running around in my own head, and that box becomes a pirate ship, and this becomes that, and it's we were always pretending like that, and I think that's part of the reason that like this newer generation that's coming into writing comics, why some of them are so bad at it, is because they've grown up with video games and with television and things like that, like just nonstop like properties.
Yeah.
So they've watched things. They've had a very passive involvement with these things, but they never, they didn't have action figures, or like they're, maybe they weren't going out in the backyard and digging holes and making tunnels and building bridges so that Indiana Jones could run across the bridge. The one friend that you had that had actually found the Indiana Jones figure, because everything was just German mechanic and, and Marion. But like they never like built those worlds in their mind. And so you've got a whole,
because they didn't have to.
Yeah. You've got a whole generation of writers that can only write about their own experience. They can't project themselves into anybody else because they've just never had that experience. And that's something too that's like, it's why men tend to, and this is obviously not, it's not a hard and fast rule, just on average, men tend to be better fiction writers than women. And it's just because of the way that we know now that male and female brains react differently to this sort of thing. Lego did studies when they were trying to figure out why can't we crack the girls market. And it was what they discovered was the play patterns are different. Men, you give boys a Batman or you give them a He-Man, and they want to know, they'll play with it, they'll project their own imagination onto it, but they're also way more interested in learning everything about that character so that they can play with it properly. Whereas they discovered girls project themselves into the property. So it's just a different mindset.
Interesting.
Now, obviously, that's on average, because whenever you say like on average men are stronger than women, there will be someone who comes in and tells you they know a woman who is stronger than a man, and you're like, that's why it's an average. Because there are outliers. So there's some obviously I've loved a lot of female comic creators in my time, like Jo Duffy did the Star Wars book, loved her stuff. Really always loved just all the books that Bobby Chase edited. I thought that were all really well done. I think she was an exceptional editor. Renee Wittestatter had to keep John Byrne in line, so talented woman there. But you had writers like Louise Simonson, like Ann Nesenti. One that I quote all the time is, or that I point to all the time is, some of the best Star Wars books were written by Karen Travis. Now she was a war correspondent, so she was able to write about these things from like, personal experience. So there are, of course, exceptions to the rule. They're just like there's a lot of men who come in and they write very effeminately and poorly. So it is it is kind of like a different thing. But heroic fiction is meant to be masculine. It's meant to be daring and high adventure. And when you start to inject feminism into it, it's why it fails, and that's why the comic industry is having problems. That's why Hollywood's having problems. You need to know your audience. If you want to make a feminist film, make it for a feminist audience. Don't come try to inject it into these things that are masculine that men want to see, because they'll reject it.
Yep. Yeah, and you're right. We're seeing this every day. Movie releases, new book, new comics. Let's take a quick second and read the chat here real quick. So early on, Cole King came in, said hi. Great to see you, Cole. That's me saying hello. Let's see, Ben Soto. Hola, Chris and Aaron. Ben, always good to see you. Hey, hey, my brothers. Always love my dude Aaron throwing down on toys and comics.
Oh, I love Destro
Absolutely.
Designs. I owe him a couple of custom figures that I've got sitting here under the like they're on a box under the desk here that I need to paint up for him. But really super great guy, Destro Designs. I also have a Twilight Guard box set to send him when I send him his painted figures. So.
Nice. Who else do we have here? Caffeinated Wolf.
Andy Andrew from the Ripaverse.
Oh, there we go. Hey, welcome. Sparrow Aaron.
That's me.
It's your Bizarro. Let's see. Ben again. Aaron is sex is confirmed. Oh no. Here comes the cancel patrol. Benjamin LOL. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate everybody being here. You know what's interesting is, so my comic book, I started getting into comics when I was about 12 or 13, and it was G.I. Joe is what got me into comics.
That's what hooked me.
I loved G.I. There was two books I got regularly, G.I. Joe and the Nam. And, of course, that was the time where anything Vietnam related was popular, was hot. You had Rambo going on. You had the Chuck Norris Missing in Action films going on. You had Tour of Duty, great show, one of my favorite shows. So my uncle was a Vietnam vet, Marine Vietnam vet. So I grew up around all that. So I immediately just loved G.I. Joe, loved the Nam. And I didn't really get into the superhero thing till I was in my 20s. And I started getting into some superhero stuff, but I always gravitated more towards humor, like offbeat, dry humor, and just bizarre stuff. But during all that collecting and reading I did, I never paid attention to who wrote it, who drew it. I collected G.I. Joe for years. Mm-hmm. And like some of those covers are just like, one of my favorite covers is, I can't even tell you who drew it. It's a skeleton with a robe firing. It just fired an M60 and there's like smoke coming from the barrel. I mean,
yeah, that's the revelation that it was, he's wearing Zartan's hood.
Yeah.
Because it's the revelation that Zartan is the assassin who killed the Hardmaster. I remember it.
That is just, I love that cover. Then there's another one where it's Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes standing side by side with their swords drawn. I couldn't tell you who drew that, but
it's the assault on Cobra Island. I can tell you what's in it.
Freaking great, man. And then like the stories, like I love the cartoon, but man, the comic book was 100 times better.
And you got
your son, Storm Shadow runs off with him, and I mean, just Springfield, the town of Springfield. Just, I'm kind of nervous about this Danny McBride film that he's fixing to do, but G.I. Joe and the Nam, those were my first loves. But and then I got into Spider-Man, and even then, I just never paid attention to the people behind it. So I'm at a loss for a lot of these names. Like I only just now have realized, Larry Hama.
That he's written almost every single issue of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. I think there's like a couple at the very beginning that he might have had a fill in or whatever, but maybe like one or two. I could even be wrong about that. But no, I remember I noticed that he was the writer on that, and then I followed him over to is it Nithman? Is that how it's pronounced? He did a ninja book about it, like an assassin, and I followed him over to that. But like I started to become aware of who did what. Like obviously Mike, I would read the bottom, the credits, and I was like, oh, Mike Vosberg is the main artist on G.I. Joe, and then later he left, and then you got like Rod Wiggum on it, and I was always happy when Rod Wiggum was drawing an issue because he was like so detailed, and it was some of my favorite stuff. And if you had like Mike Zeck on a cover, I knew who that was. Because I love, there was just always something striking about the images that they did. So I would, I would pick up on that. I mean, I even knew like years later, so I'm working at Tokyo Pop, and Carl Potts comes in as a consultant. And I know Carl Potts because they did that little cartoon of him in the Marvel book where he's like, "Hi, I'm Carl Potts, who crazy glued my elbow to the desk." And that always like stuck with me. So it's like I mentioned that to him, and then we were good friends. Of. He's like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you remember that." I was like, "Yeah, no, I became interested." You know what I noticed? It was after G.I. Joe 19, where they had wrapped up a bunch of storylines. Quinn dies, Dr. Venom dies, Scarface dies. And then the next issue is a Clutch issue in Asbury Park. And I remember thinking, because you get to the end of G.I. Joe 19, and Snake Eyes is holding Quinn's necklace, because Quinn's dead, and then, they're holding General Flag's dog tags. And I thought that was the end of the series. And I remember it had a different icon in the corner, because usually it had Grunt in the corner box. Mm-hmm. But instead it had Bobby Chase, I think it was, with shrapnel bouncing off her helmet, because it was Assistant Editor's Month. And for some reason, when we got to that ending, I was like, oh, this book is over. And so I go into 7-Eleven the next month, and there's this issue about focusing on Clutch, which doesn't seem to go with any of the other issues, because I didn't know what a one-shot was at that time. I've been reading just G.I. Joe in this continuing story.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, it's still continuing. And then, 21 came out and 22. And obviously by then I figured it out. But at that point I was like, Assistant Editor's Month. Oh, Bobby Chase is the assistant editor. She was in charge of this issue. So who's the regular editor? When they come back in, I started paying attention to all of that, all of the credits.
Let's get back onto you here. I'm really
we can talk about G.I. Joe all night. I mean, I'm kind of tired of talking about me all the time. I'd rather talk about G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe's pretty awesome. Hey, speaking of 80s, what did you see Masters of the Universe?
I did, yeah.
What'd you think?
I liked it. I had a good time.
Yeah.
For me, it's really hard to turn off my editor brain. Okay. And so I'm always like, I would have changed this. I would have changed this. I would have changed this. I would have cut out some of the goofier humor. I would have let some moments land. And kind of like, because there's moments where I was just like, what are we doing? Like the whole thing where, I don't want to give away spoilers for people who haven't seen it, but there's a moment where He-Man does something that causes injury to someone that he cares about, and then they have this like tender moment, and the whole time they're doing that, I'm like, where is Skeletor and Evil Lyn? They were just there. Like, why are they like?
Oh yeah.
Why are they allowing this to happen? And so a lot of those things where it was shot in a way that I'm like, well, if you really wanted to kill this guy, this should be shot in a way that's more efficiently, communicating that. Yeah. The one thing I really hated is they do like a Queen song where everybody's marching out of the prison to kick ass. Yeah, and it's like, it's like this badass moment, but then because of the smoke, they all start coughing. And I was just like, you couldn't let one heroic moment go without doing the dumb MCU, record scratch, kind of humor. So overall, I liked it. I think it's probably the best Masters of the Universe film we could have hoped for out of current Hollywood, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted.
Well, I will tell you, I absolutely loved it. I had a great time. Man, when he first does the I have the power, I went, yeah! I was screaming and cheering. And
I did get goosebumps. I did get goosebumps when that happened because it was such an iconic moment. I did go back and see it with a friend, and I enjoyed it more the second time because once I knew things were coming, like they didn't feel as jarring. So I did like it a lot more, and I'm sure that I'll like it more as I watch it again in the future.
I took my 14-year-old and my 11-year-old to see it, and they loved it. And then the audience, like, I thought I was the only one cheering and stuff in the film, but when it ended, I mean, the whole audience erupted in applause. Like it was, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was really disappointed to see how poorly it did at the box office.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of like the Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves movie, where like
that was just a fun movie.
That was a really fun movie, and that deserved to be a more successful movie. But I think sometimes the marketing does not do the film any favors, and so people don't don't go check it out. I think the other problem is that people know it's just going to be on streaming in a month or two. So,
Yeah, that's true.
There's no fear of missing out anymore. It's like people don't rush to the theater because they're like, I can talk about this in a month when everybody's seen it.
Let's see. Ivan Dirty Sanchez says it had issues like the humor, but it's probably one of the best live action movies based on a cartoon for a while, since other live action movies suck.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Yeah.
It like I said, I liked it a lot the second time. I completely butchered that sentence, but you get what I mean.
I know what you're talking about. Let's talk about how do you get inspired for a story? Do you just, like, for me, I read a lot of history books. I read a lot of science magazines. So, like, I recently read an article about this information that the James Webb Telescope sent back that suggested that every black hole in our universe has within it a mini universe, and that our own universe exists within a black hole. And then you talk about going down the rabbit hole. I mean, I just spiral going down thinking about something like that. And I start thinking, well, holy crap, that'll make a really good story. So I find a lot of my inspiration for stories comes from things I read. What would you say is one of your big inspiration sources, or maybe not even a source, just what can trigger your imagination and say, hey, that would be a good story?
I mean, obviously reading a lot, you read things and you like certain ideas will form, like, especially if there's an idea in a book that I'm like, that's a good idea, but I don't like where they took it, or I think there was a more interesting way they could have done it. And then you go, okay, well, how do I make that? How do I spin that into something original and something that feels interesting and that will like resonate with people? I think a huge one for me is I like to listen to the way that people talk. One of the things that we really got praised for on the Darkwing Duck comic was when we did our revision of it, when it was no longer Ian trying to do his dialogue over what I had said. But when we got to restore it and people read the Definitively Dangerous edition, one of the best compliments was people would say, like, I can hear the voice actors like delivering these lines.
Yeah.
And that was my intention. I was such a huge fan of the show, and I did go back and like rewatch a bunch of episodes. Like, we're going to do, we've got Steelbeak coming up. I'm going to go back and I'm going to listen to everything that Rob Paulson did with Steelbeak, so that, I put it in the script, I put it all down on the page, and then I can go in and I can like trim it out until it sounds like, the way he would deliver it. The same with Jim Cummings, so like with Darkwing, I really had that to draw from. And any new characters we introduced, Tad Stones gave me like one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten, which was, when you create a new character for animation, and this works for comics as well, decide who you would cast to play that person. And then what of that actor will then inform their performance. So it's like, if you're like, this character would be Jeffrey Combs, then you write to Jeffrey Combs' strengths, so what I think he would deliver well. And one of the most gratifying things that kind of came out of that was I was on a panel at I want to say it was at ToonCon in Pasadena, and we had a bunch of the Darkwing voice actors there. We had Katie Lee. We had Katie Lee does a pretty good Goslin, by the way. She doesn't just do Honker. She can imitate Christine Cavanaugh pretty well, and I put her on the spot, but she delivered. But they read from the Definitively Dangerous edition, and one of the most gratifying things was Michael Bell has like maybe a minute to look at these pages before we go into them doing the live reading, and he looked at Silvani's art and what was happening on the page, and he realized that we were doing a darker version of Quackerjack. So when he started at his normal Quackerjack voice, and then as Quackerjack got more sinister, he just brought it down just ever so slightly, but gave him so much more menace. And it was like, this is exactly what we were, I was like, oh my God, like, I felt really good because here he is like reading this dialogue and it just like turning it into, a performance and really getting to chew on it. So, so those sort of things inspire me. Relationships, between people that I know, or even relationships that I've had, like, everything kind of like becomes pieces for your story. There's things with Colonel Silverstreak in, there's things that he will say in the book, upcoming in the book, that are things my dad says. Where it's like, dad will say something, I'll be like, well, that is too good to not, be a story, and I'll jot it down. So, and I listen to people's conversations, like when I go out, and people are like talking around you. I like to listen to how people communicate with each other, and I think that informs a lot of stuff that I do, and why like people say that my dialogue sounds natural, is because even when you're doing exposition, one thing I love to help writers with is they've got to deliver this clunky exposition, and I'm like, okay, well, here's how you make it conversational. Here's how you make it feel like the characters would be saying this, instead of like it's time for the info dump.
Right.
You know what, Tank Ferret? I will smash that like I will.
Thanks for coming in, Tank. Good to see you as always, sir. Where did Doomface come from?
So Doomface was, I knew I wanted to do a creator-owned book, and I didn't know exactly like what I was going to do at the time. I had some ideas. I had some characters I'd been playing around with for a long time, and I knew I wanted to do something humorous, because I was like, well, if I'm going to build off of, what I did on Darkwing and things like that, people will probably be expecting a certain kind of book, and I enjoyed doing humor anyway. And there's just a lot of things in the comic industry over the last decade to make fun of. And so I had this meta idea of these two superheroes, that were like small town superheroes trying to break into the bigger superhero business, in the big city. But what if breaking into the superhero business was like trying to break into the comic industry, in the last decade? And with the same egos and the same, and like just drawing on my experiences within Boom and these horrible people that had who behaved horribly. I was like, what if that was the, because at the time, comic industry pros were acting horrifically towards the customers. Yeah. And so I was like, it'll be kind of fun to do a meta commentary on that, where the superheroes are kind of like that way, I mean, and the Boys had been done, and Mark Waid had done Irredeemable with and we had Injustice, like the bad guy superheroes. And obviously, what I do is probably closer to the Boys, although not as crass and not quite as nihilistic. I think I do it in a funnier, more humorous way. But it was kind of that idea of like, what if these superheroes were as bad as the comic book pros? Like treating the people that they're supposed to save, the people they're supposed to be there for. So that was like the germ of the idea. And then I was like, okay, I don't know what to call it. And I was coming up with more villains, because I'm like, I'm going to need a lot of villains. And I'm a big Dr. Doom fan. He's my favorite villain. And obviously I like Skeletor and Hordak and Primeval and all these, 80s villains that were like over the top. And I was like, it'd be kind of fun wrinkle for the book if instead of the heroes being the main character, if this returning villain from the 80s was the main character. And here he is thrust into the present, and he has a very specific way of doing things that is the old over-the-top 80s villain way. And now everybody, from politicians to world leaders to, the people that we depend on at the CDC, they're all much bigger supervillains. Like, Bill Gates is probably one of the biggest supervillains on the face of the earth, but he's not cool like we were promised supervillains would be, right?
Right.
So that was kind of the idea. And I was like, I want a Dr. Doom-like character. And I liked the idea of naming a character Doomface, because then he could rather stupidly say, I am Doomface, the face of your doom. I kind of like the redundancy of the joke. Like, one of my favorite bits is where where Ron Burgundy says like, we are laughing, and then goes on to describe everything that's happening, or Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog where Captain Hammer says, I'm going to show Penny the ham jet, the ham cycle, then I'm going to show her the hammer, and these are not the hammer. And then he walks off, and you're left with that. But then he comes back in to explain the joke. He's like, the hammer is my penis. That's funny. It's like, we got it, but he had to come back in. So Doomface, I am the face of your doom, kind of became like my joke along those lines. So, and once I had Doomface, we had I had like the whole Ghost Bros kind of intro with him returning in mind, and the producer character, who I think at first was named Jenna, but it was just like a placeholder name, and I didn't like it, and then I kind of decided she was 5 feet tall, because I wanted her to be juxtaposed against Doomface, who's like 7 feet. And I started thinking about like a specific friend of mine, and then like Alexa Bliss and Zelina Vega are both wrestlers that, female wrestlers, and they're both like 5 foot. And I was like, well, yeah, it'd be kind of cool. Like I'll make her Latina and I'll name her Lexi Vega, and she was like just kind of like a throwaway character for the first issue. But once I put her and Doomface together and I started to write their back and forth, I was like, okay, no, she's going to be brought on as the major domo, and a lot of the humor with Doomface will be the conflict between the two of them. You know, she's the one person that can kind of talk back to him in her fiery Latina way and not get blown up. You know, because for some reason, like he doesn't blow her up, and we'll get further into that. As like I said, I like to write relationships. So as we see, like the relationship of these different characters kind of like come together, and them kind of like jockey for position.
Maybe it has something to do with the metal bustier.
It might, yeah. I mean, I like that joke a lot. I like to joke a lot about metal bustiers being reserved for formal occasions.
You're right. Yes, that was great.
And that gets paid off in issue 2. It originally was going to be in issue 1, but you know, we had funding goals to like extend issue 1 even further, but you know, in the time frame we didn't quite hit that. So that a lot of that became issue 2. But yeah, there's a lot of fun to be had with her and Doomface. And
so with Doomface, is there a way that people can get #1 still, or do we need to wait for the launch of issue 2? Will there be a catch-up tier?
Yeah, I'm going to do a catch-up tier for issue 2. There will be once I fulfill all of the orders, you know, from the backers, because what I'm trying to do, I did overprint for damages and things like that because or lost, you know, somebody's like, hey, I never got my book, and you realize it, you know, for some reason it ended up in, you know, it was supposed to go to Ohio and ended up in Canada, you know, which does and has happened. Once we fulfill that, and once I kind of know what my leftover inventory is, I'll put them up on kneelbeforedoomface.com. And then we'll also have some catch-up tiers for when we launch book 2, which is inks are done, by the way. One of the things I learned on this first campaign is that there's a thing that happens with campaigns if your book isn't finished like right at the beginning. I'm going to sneeze. Give me. Thank you. So, you know, there's what you call with any kind of comic production, whether it's month-to-month comics or you know, Kickstarter. There's this thing that we call the creep, where it's like one thing will go wrong, and then that will sort of like cascade outward. And so something that, like, you know, it's like, okay, so this effect, you know, this person on the team had a death in the family, and so there's like a week where they didn't work, and now you're off schedule with the next person in the chain. And so it becomes kind of like this cascading problem. And I really, and that's in monthly comics, but especially is true in crowdfunded comics. So for issue 2, what I did was I decided that, you know, we had some money left over from the campaign that, you know, I put into issue 2, and we would finish issue 2 before we went to sale with it. I want it to be a pre-order rather than a crowdfund. So there will be catch-up tiers. I've already got a special edition cover in mind. So, you know, we'll have issue 1 available again. You can probably pick up, you know, some stragglers of the original copies, you know, the first printings, once they go up on kneelbeforedoomface.com. But we'll have a special, like, I want to do a nice foil edition of issue 1.
Nice.
With the Kenneth Roquefort cover.
Oh, beautiful cover.
Yeah, I would love to do that in foil, and so that'll probably be our catch up on when we launch 2. Is you'll be able to get the foil edition.
Well, I'm all over it when it launches. Do you have a rough idea? Is it going to be this year? Is it going to be next year launch? What are you thinking?
I originally wanted to go with a distributor, like someone else to kind of like handle the campaign, but it looks like they wouldn't be able to tackle it till next year. So I'll probably, but I do want to launch it this year, probably late summer after all of the books, all of the issue 1 books are out and fulfilled. We'll launch book 2.
Good man. That's a good strategy. Actually, I did a bootlegger pledge where when I launched my first campaign that we pledged to never launch another campaign until the previous one is completely fulfilled.
No, I think that's important because you obviously I've worked on other stuff, and there's other properties that, you know, may launch that I've worked on, you know, that aren't mine. like we did Unholy Nightmare. I'm the editor on that. That campaign's going really well on Kickstarter right now for Unholy Nightmare 3, and it's got catch-up tiers and things like that. And it's like, I'm asking people to go and back that, but I'm just the editor on that. I don't own that property. It's not
right, exactly.
It's not mine, and it is done. So it's complete and ready to ship as soon as ready to go to print and ship as soon as the campaign is. So, but I think it's important. I think that you have a contract with your readers, and some people have the attitude of they're like, well, it's Kickstarter is a maybe you'll get it, and I'm like, no. You were saying I'm going to produce this thing, and I said from the beginning, even if something horrible befell me, and I was like, like all my money and things like that, like all the money from the campaign, like I was in an accident and et cetera, et cetera. It's like, well, guess what? I have a lot of worldly possessions that I can sell off in order to get the money to fulfill this campaign if I have to, because come hell or high water, the backers are going to get their books.
That's awesome. That's really fantastic. And that's the right mindset. I mean, for someone like me who, doesn't have a huge, history of course, I ran my own comic book company in the early 2000s and had about a 4-year run of putting out our own books. And it was largely local in the DFW area. So, most people don't even know who I am. And, so trust is one of the biggest hurdles to build, when you're first starting out. And I tried all different types of things to build trust, like I said, like the bootlegger pledge. We did things like a no AI pledge that, there'll never be any AI art in anything we sell. I do use AI for thumbnails and, little thing like if one thing I like to do, I'm very visual. So if I'm writing a story and I get kind of, hung up, I'll ask AI, hey, render this out for me. And it'll produce a picture of wherever I am at, and that'll kind of get my juices flowing again, and I'll start going again. But that's about the extent of the use for AI for bootlegger, and then I had a few people who were double charged, so I used Fund My Comic on my second opportunity of my second try at crowdfunding, and as soon as they messaged me that they had got double charged, I went into Stripe, refunded it right away, and made a post about it just to say, hey, if you've had any issues, let me know. So I try to be super transparent about everything I did to build that trust with the potential backers. But I've been burned. I've been lucky that I haven't. I've been burned. Really once. But I know a lot of people that have been burned quite a bit, and something reaches its funding goal and they're just never seen or heard from again.
Yeah, it's and it's really maddening when you see like they're still out there and they're like putting out books through. It's like there's a lot of guys like there's a guy that did that book. I don't know, it was called like Hawaiian Dick or something like that, and. Mm-hmm. And it's like years and years, but there he is, like working at Valiant, and it's like, yeah, I get that you gotta pay the bills, but you also have to fulfill. It's been years; you have to fulfill your obligations to your backers. I never want to take any, and this is like part of the reason that I kind of like fell out with the mainstream too, is because when they started treating customers poorly, it's like, this is a customer service business. You are asking people to spend their hard-earned money on your product, whether you're doing it for a publisher. It's like, I don't get to tell people to piss off because Udon hired me to do a Street Fighter book and I work for Udon. I don't work for you. No, I work for you because I need you to go pick up. Right. I need to write good things that you will enjoy so that you will go pick up the Street Fighter book so that I can continue. And so then an artist can get work. So a letterer can get work, we owe everything to the fan, to the customer. Because, and this is one of the things I say when people come up and they're like, they've got like some Darkwing Duck comics or whatnot from my run. And they say, well, how much do you charge to sign? And it's like, I don't charge anything to sign because you bought my book. I owe you a signature. I owe you a piece of my time. You allow me to do the things that I want to do in life with your patronage. So I feel like I have an obligation to the customer.
Wow, that's a rare mindset these days, and kudos to you for doing the right thing. I really feel that is the right way to treat your readers, because you're 100% right, and especially in this day and age, and with specifically crowdfunding, the reader, they're kind of buying you as well.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of or maybe buying into you is maybe the better way to put that. I've seen that YouTube is a big converter. Like if the bigger YouTube following is, that converts more of your audience to backers than say Instagram or X or Facebook, what have you. And that makes sense, because if you're putting out a lot of content, going live, they feel like they're getting to know you, and they're kind of feeling like you're their friend. And I can see how that can be better at converting. Ivan Sanchez, and for that, folks return and show their support. Absolutely, 100%.
They absolutely do.
100%.
One of the things, like I always say, like I don't like going to conventions, and what I mean by that is like I don't like traveling to conventions. Traveling is such a pain in the ass. And it's like everything. Like going to a con, it's like it's really expensive. So I don't like going to a convention. I love being at a convention. If I could just, it's like anytime anybody's like, hey, do you want to come? We'll take care of everything, and you can just come to the show. I'm like, let's do it, because you've taken all of the pressure off of me. I just have to show up where you want me to be. And I love that. I love, I love meeting the fans. I love making new fans. I love, talking to comic book fans about, and even if it's not my stuff, just about comics in general. It's a really fun energy it shows. So I have a really good time with it. I think that's the difference.
Well, we are at the 1 hour 15 mark, and as I mentioned earlier, I am in Arkansas visiting family. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut this episode here. Aaron, I would love to have you on the show again. You're very fascinating. You've got a very interesting history, and I'd like to get more into the creative side of things with you again, if you'd be willing to come on another time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what else is on the horizon for you other than Doomface 2? You got any other projects you're editing or things like that?
Yeah, so out in what should be out in stores, it's either this week or in the next couple weeks. Street Fighter Masters Ken is coming out from Udon Entertainment. I wrote that, and had a really good time doing that. Got to have Ken fight one of the Darkstalkers, so that was a lot of fun. I'm a big Darkstalkers fan. I've got upcoming. I've been working on a book called The Vengeance of Vincent Spector, which is a story by Brett Fossey. But I've gone through and I've taken kind of like his overall story ideas and written the script. And Renzo and Oscar and Wilson Da Silva have also worked on that book. So it's like Team Doomface has been on that book as well. So if you love Renzo's art, we're going to give you more of it. And who could not love Renzo's art? The man is fantastic. So we're going to be doing that. We're going to be making some announcements on that soon. On where you're going to be able to find that. And then, I do a lot of editing. So it's like I work on The Atlantean with Russ Leach, which is a called The Conqueror magazine, and that he does gorgeous art for. I work with Dolan Waddick and Aurelio Mazzara on their property, Unholy Nightmare. I'm the editor on that book. So, it's like I get to see all the cool stuff that they're doing before anybody else does. That is actually on Kickstarter right now, if you want to go check it out. And just tune in and, come see us on Thinking Critical on Comics Aficionados tomorrow. Every Saturday, we do a roundtable panel of the latest comic news. And I will be hosting that tomorrow. So come and check us out.
Where else can people find you?
I am on Twitter, but if you don't want to know my opinions, then you're probably best to follow me on Instagram. I've been told that I shouldn't offer any opinions whatsoever on Twitter because I'm trying to market a book, and people might not like me or might not want to work with me. And I understand that mindset, I really do. But I'm not trying to work in the mainstream, and I don't necessarily care if people in the mainstream like me. The people that I want to connect with are the comic fans that are lapsed because they're not being served by the current comic book industry. So I will make my opinions on that known. and you can come along. And if you don't like it, you don't have to follow me. But I hope that at least I can still entertain you on Instagram or with the comics that I do. So.
Well, I'm going to kind of speak to that a bit. There used to be a time where we could disagree on any subject and not have to hate each other for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know when that stopped being a thing, but I'll straight up tell, and I mean, I know you're talking more of the comic industry. I'm just saying in general, I am a straight up conservative, right wing, whatever. I've got no qualms working with anybody who has a completely different opinion than me on anything, if we can come together and tell a good story.
Some of my favorite people in the world absolutely disagree with me on a great number of things. I won't out her, but there's a comic artist in the industry who is far more to the left than I would ever be, and I adore her. I think she's a fantastic person. I have friends from all political walks of life, all religious walks of life. I don't have to agree with you to love you, and I think that there's
100%.
something in that we should try to get back to.
Agreed,
but at the same time,
100%.
I understand that I am X's little sauce pot, as a friend called me. So.
Well, Aaron, thank you for coming on. I know it's been funny kind of getting you on here. I'm glad we got you on here. Great show, great discussion. Again, man, there's so much I'd like to go into in more depth in another time. And just thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
And yeah, no, I had a great time. Let's go even bigger next time.
All right. Let's thank you everybody for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow on a special edition of the Creators Table with artist Neil McGregor. All right, buddy. Everybody have a good weekend, and we'll see you. And in stream.